Try something strange. Right now, try to predict your next thought. Not the thought you're planning to have. The next one that simply appears. Wait. What was it? You couldn't know it until it arrived. And yet, the moment it appeared, you probably called it your thought. But that creates a strange problem. If you didn't know what the thought would be before it appeared, what exactly did you choose? We normally imagine thinking like this, I think. Then, the thought happens. But that may be too simple. Some thoughts arrive without an invitation. A memory suddenly appears. A face enters your mind. A strange question forms. A song you haven't heard in years suddenly starts playing in your head. You didn't consciously schedule any of it. Neuroscience often describes these experiences under the broader idea of spontaneous thought, mental states that arise relatively freely rather than being tightly directed by an immediate task. And this is where the ordinary idea of, I am thinking, becomes strange. Because there seem to be two different events, the thought appearing, and your awareness of the thought. Imagine you're sitting alone in a dark room. You suddenly remember someone you haven't thought about in 10 years. For a fraction of a second, you don't know why that memory appeared. Then your mind searches backward. Maybe it was the room. Maybe a smell. Maybe something you saw earlier. Maybe some connection your brain made without telling you. Eventually, you find an explanation. And then something interesting happens. You don't usually say, a mental event occurred. You say, I remembered. The brain gives the experience an owner. Me. But here's the deeper question. Is the feeling of being the author the same thing as actually witnessing the process that produced the thought? We know that the brain constructs a sense of agency, the feeling that we are controlling an action and causing its consequences. Researchers study this as a distinct psychological and neural phenomenon. That doesn't prove the self is an illusion. It proves something more interesting. The feeling of authorship is itself something the brain has to generate. And once you realize that, the question changes. Maybe the mystery isn't, do I have thoughts? Maybe it's, where does the author appear? Now consider one of the most famous experiments in the history of free will. In the 1980s, Benjamin Libet studied voluntary movement. Participants were asked to make a simple movement whenever they felt like it. Researchers recorded brain activity, while participants reported when they consciously became aware of their intention to move. Libet reported that a measurable neural signal, the readiness potential, could begin before the reported conscious intention. The interpretation became explosive. Maybe the brain starts preparing an action, and consciousness only becomes aware of the decision afterward. If that were the whole story, the conscious might look less like the author and more like the narrator. But there is a problem. Later research challenged how strongly Libet's results can be interpreted. Reviews and meta-analyses have pointed out uncertainty about what the readiness potential actually represents, and whether it can legitimately be treated as proof that conscious intention is powerless. So science does not give us a simple answer. You have no free will. Instead, it gives us something much more uncomfortable. We don't fully understand how conscious intention, unconscious brain activity, decision-making, and the feeling of agency fit together. And now return to the experiment. Predict your next thought. You can't. At least, not in the ordinary sense. You can decide, I will think about a tree, but you don't control every thought that arrives while you're doing it. A memory can interrupt. A sound can change your attention. A completely unrelated idea can appear. And then, you notice it. So perhaps consciousness isn't a little person sitting inside your skull, choosing every thought like files from a menu. Perhaps the mind is more like a process unfolding, with conscious awareness becoming part of that process. And if that's true, then the word I becomes surprisingly difficult to define. Because when you say, I had that thought, who is the I? The brain that generated it? The consciousness that noticed it? The part that remembers it? Or the narrator that connected all three and called them one person? Maybe the strangest thing about thought isn't that the brain can produce ideas. It's that an idea can appear, and almost immediately, someone inside the experience claims ownership of it. And perhaps that's the real glitch. Not that your thoughts are outside your control, but that you may never directly experience the moment when a thought becomes yours. So try the experiment one more time. Don't predict your next thought. Just wait for it. And when it appears, ask yourself, did I choose that thought, or did I simply arrive in time to notice it?